Kessie. I'm a Ghanaian Canadian woman born and raised in Toronto, and I have a background in life sciences and my Master's of Science in Sustainability Management. The Insights to Action project was formed to better understand the challenges that Black women face navigating employment and justice sectors. We're hoping that we're able to build evidence around this topic, as there's not much data or research around the experiences of young Black women. And we hope that with the information we gather, we can then start dialogue on how we can address the challenges that Black women face in all the spaces that we occupy. And so this was a collaborative project with women covering health centers, academics, researchers, and service providers, as well as young Black women who were co-researchers, advisory members, and participants in this work. And what made this project really unique is that it really centered the leadership and the voices of young Black women in the
My name is Chantal. I was born and raised in Bermuda and came to Canada in 2012 for university, and ever since then I have been on an immigration journey. This space kind of helped me be honest with how I act, if that makes any sense. On a daily, I am worried or I'm hyper aware of how I'm perceived, and therefore maybe have certain mannerisms and actions and speech that kind of make me digestible in spaces. But being in this space, I was able to be honest in a way that I have not been able to within my journey in Canada.
My name is Tasma Sulaiman. I'm Somali and I'm a youth worker in Toronto. Being a part of the project impacted me on several different kind of layers. First and foremost, as a Black woman experiencing these things, it's great to have your voice affirmed and realizing that it's not only you, it's not just you experiencing this alone, and there's a community there that goes through the same things, and not only that, kind of understands and empathizes with why you feel all the time anxious and you feel tired and exhausted. And then as a service provider and as a youth worker, I'm able to now not only take this back to the organizations I work with and being like, hey, look, this is some concrete data available to you, and here are these recommendations. Now the onus is on you to actually move forward and say what you're going to do and support these folks that are occupying these spaces of yours. When talking about surveillance, I think we have to talk about when we occupy these spaces, I'm clenched. And then when I leave those rooms, I'm because I'm constantly having to be how am I being perceived? What am I saying? How is this going to be taken? And how will this be taken and then used against me in a way? So that's kind of the way I see the perception. And in this study and in this project, we were able to see that this is a shared experience. This isn't just a one-off where it's oh, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the odd one out, but it's something that happens quite often.
And I know for myself, kindness does not mean safety for us, so we can be in spaces that we're trying to occupy and be ourselves. And it might feel kind and welcoming, but you're still very much surveilled, and your actions are still being digested in a way that you're self-conscious. And as you said, it almost feels like, how is this going to be used against me? I know you're smiling and we're having a nice conversation, but I know also you're analyzing me against stereotypes or perceptions that are preconceived of me. It's never just Chantal entering a room, it's Chantal and everything else that people perceive. So it's like gymnastics, trying to really let yourself show, but still articulate in a way that you have control over how you're perceived. And that's the thing, I don't always want to have control. I want to be free.
Do you think that your experience, because you've lived in different cities, is it different from city to city, or was it your first culture shock? What was that first experience of where you're oh?
Oh, yeah. So I came in 2012, after I graduated high school, I went to Newfoundland. So that was extremely drastic for me. I went from a black country to being the only black person in every room. In my housing, I was the only black person. There's about 1,000 of us, you know, so it was very hard. I, for the first time, felt being black, if that made sense. Like growing up, I didn't feel that, you know, but adapting in Newfoundland, I felt it. And trying to navigate that was a challenge, you know. I shrunk myself a lot, you know. I changed how I talked a lot, you know. My style changed itself, you know, because it was land of Lululemon leggings and Uggs, you know, and I was coming from hot snappers, like, you know. So it was even style, simple things that made me feel different. But coming to Toronto now and being in a cultural melting pot, hearing Caribbean music, you know, having all sorts of food accessible to me, giving me that sense of home has made a huge difference for me, for my self-esteem, and feeling a belonging, because it was very hard for me to feel like I can make a home here, you know, always questioning, should I be here? Is the opportunity worth it, you know? But for once, I feel like I actually have community and I do belong here.
Like when we're in those spaces, we have this persona, this version of Chantel, this version of Tisma that's being presented, but only those that I feel comfortable around know the real Tisma or know the real Chantel. And it sucks that this is like a commonality amongst us, because I think a lot of the times we also hold so much power in our identities and the different spaces and intersectionalities that we occupy, and we're not able to kind of portray that because we're so worried about, are we using the right words? Do I have an accent? Whether that's an accent from a different country because I'm a newcomer, or an accent that is considered a quote unquote black accent. So am I carrying that, and we're so worried about that we're not actually able to get to the root of it and make the impact that we do.
Policing gives me anxiety in general. And the other day at work, I feel like I saw how possibly things could unfold that result in like police brutality against black people, you know? It was this lady, she was on her phone, you know, and please come. I was working, you know, she's like, please come. They're disturbing, you know, call somebody, you know? And I feel like if she did call somebody and they came, it would be her voice and her distress that was absorbed as what needs to be prioritized over de-escalating and protecting. As a sister to a black man, as an auntie to black nieces, that will all be in those situations where I would want to protect, you know, and make sure everyone's safe. I already know, and like, I'm kind of at the mercy, you know, to the policing system, and it's very disheartening, you know. It's like, who shows up for us?
Growing up, I saw the police as the devil. Like I saw them as the worst thing. Like they're not going to do anything. Not only that, they're going to come and then try to figure out what you did wrong. And mind you, I have never committed a crime in my life, never plotted to commit a crime. But like you just have this sense of panic. Like when a police officer stops me, like whether that be them pulling me over, maybe for a routine traffic, whatever it is, I'm filled with, oh my gosh, this could end up with me getting some sort of in trouble with the law. I could end up with, like, it's just a constant, like, I don't know what's gonna happen. And then furthermore, when you have siblings, especially like my brothers, I'm like, oh, like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to protect them, because even when something goes wrong in our community or somebody in our community is harmed, I'm like, who like you said, who's protecting us? Who has my back? Who's gonna make sure that justice is served as they seem to claim on their soapbox? I'm like, it doesn't seem like they care. It only seems like they care of perpetuating the stereotype that black folks or folks from these neighborhoods that are predominantly black, they're the issue, they're the problem.
Another layer of armor is added to your toolkit that you should not have to use, you know, but you do. And there's horror flashes when the siren goes, like it's instant negative. Like, you know, it's not like, oh, I can't, you know, it's the worst case scenario comes to mind, you know. But I think we just have to keep showing up for each other and making space and speaking out. Because this can't be life. It can't continue to be life, you know, not for our nieces, our brothers, future, you know. Again, as you said before, this all has continued for decades and centuries, and the tune keeps going, you know. So when is the like radio going to be shut off and reset, you know? Because it's just too heavy.
My name is Samaya. I helped conduct the research with Women's Health and Women's Hands alongside a really great team. This project means a lot to me because I am a Black woman myself, and the research was surrounded by investigating and coming to the forefront with the experiences of Black women in Toronto, which is great as well because I was born and raised in Toronto. I've lived here my whole life. And being able to conduct research and bring that to the forefront about Black women in Toronto meant a lot to me. Going through the research, it almost felt like I was looking in the mirror because a lot of women would talk, and a lot of the things that they were experiencing were very similar to what I was experiencing when it came to microaggression in the workplace, finding employment, all these things I could relate to. And I'm just grateful that I got to work with a great team.
Varisha Ankra. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I actually grew up in Vaughan. I am a Sente, Ashanti. I'm Ghanaian as well. My parents are from Kumasi. I work in the media space. I'm a culture and music writer. And in these spaces, there's just a lot of white folks. And so I'm really thankful for Insights to Action and spaces where Black women can come and speak about their experiences. Finding work and working in media spaces as a Black woman, it means that a lot of people are going to try to tell you that you are not qualified, even though Black people create the culture, as we know. They've tried to push us out of these spaces, especially in Canada, and try to pretend as if Black people aren't here and that we aren't creating culture here. Because there might not be a lot of representation of us on screen and in television shows that we produce. It's encouraging. This entire project has been encouraging. It's been a way for me to speak about my experiences and also have data to back it up if anybody asks, or if we need any more proof that these things are happening to us as Black women in workspaces, in school spaces. So this means community to me, and I'm super grateful.
I was kind of grateful that we get to do this part, I feel like, of the research, because it's kind of like a debrief, because everyone basically did research with individual other people or certain types of themes, and I feel like this is a good way to kind of debrief how I feel, because during it you don't necessarily, as a researcher, you can't put your opinion or the way you feel into it. There can be bias, so I feel like this is a good way to kind of let go of how I feel. Because even there was aspects where there was a literature review part, and I was oh, when I was reading it, I'm like, this is so stressful. How much more research do people need to know that people are racist? I was how much more research they need to know that microaggression exists?
It's really odd, right? That we have to sort of quantify our experiences and what we go through, even though it's lived. I think I remember at the workplace, I was sort of always presenting I wasn't going to cause a fuss, or I came from this proper background and I didn't want anybody to sort of catch me, sort of as if I'm wearing this mask. And it felt fake. It felt fake a lot of the time because I know that you're looking at me oddly, whether it's my hair or my nails, the way I show up, but I also know that I'm qualified for this position. So how's your experience been in your workspace?
I think for me, the workspace is that I feel like I'm always wearing a mask that I have to, when I get home, I take it off and I'm and I take a huge deep breath. And I think even just being in when I'm around, for instance, okay, say if I'm at work, I'm predominantly around white people. I'm a TA, I'm a McMaster, so I'm around a lot of people. Usually I'm either the only person of color in the room, only Black woman, Black Muslim woman in the space. So it's I always have to conduct myself in a way where it's okay, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, but at the same time, I know what I'm talking about. I know I'm here in this space because I guess you could say, quote unquote, you've proved yourself. Like you're doing your master's, like you've done all the studying to get to this point in your life, just like everybody else. But people do this thing where they're so condescending to you. They speak to you like you don't know like what you're talking about, but you've done the same reading. Like it's this weird thing where it's like we read the same book, but it's like they feel like they have to break it down for you. But it's like, I don't need you to break it down for me. I understand.
In one of my courses, I think they were trying to say that there wasn't a lot of other black students, and I guess they were trying to like speak about like numbers, and I was the only black student in the class, obviously. And my TA, affirmative action, that's what affirmative action. We were discussing that, and the other students were trying to say, well, yeah, that's how like the black kids got into MAC, and my TA didn't say anything. And I remember feeling like, wow, this is a class where we're supposed to be talking about things like this, and people are supposed to be educated, but they weren't. And so that happened at MAC in Hamilton, in Canada. So yeah, being a black student, it's really important that we have TAs and teachers that look like us, especially black women, and have us be affirmed in academia. So thank you for the work you're doing. As well as in high school, I remember we had like a supply teacher. And you know, when everybody goes through the names, but as African kids, we know when our name's about to come up, like this is about to be a problem. And he pronounced my name incorrectly, and I said it's Veracia, and he said, sorry, I didn't know I had to say it black. I don't know, maybe it's an African name sounding to him, or it's a black sounding name to him, but it's an English term.
Oh my God.
And yeah, so we just have a bunch of odd experiences in school.
Oh my God.
And I didn't say anything to him. I was like, okay. How do I react right now? Because as a black student in a predominantly white space in a predominantly white school, do I get in trouble for sticking up for myself? Is it even necessary? Sometimes you already are loaded with so many things when you're going to school that like, I'm here to learn. Now I gotta be fighting off teachers. I might get sent to the principal's office, which has happened a couple of times because I've responded. And you have all the pressures of like your home community and your parents and just wanting to show up well so that nobody thinks you're misbehaving. So you don't say anything. And I think that happens in our workspaces as well.
You know how like some people, it's like they can live their whole life not talking about systemic racism because it just doesn't, they're on the benefiting end, if we're being honest. There are groups of people who benefit from it, but black women specifically never will. They'll never benefit. They'll never be on the receiving end where they're benefiting from it. That's why I can't go a day in my life not talking about systemic racism, because literally my whole life has been affected by colonialism and genocide and just like my family migrating here. All these aspects of just down to what I'm eating is affected by colonialism. And it's like, you know, I feel like doing Insights to Action just allowed me to feel like, okay, you know what? Although all these things are affecting you or affecting the women around you, at least you're doing something that has meaning.
I think seeing other black women show up in these spaces and talk about their experiences is like more than I could have asked for growing up, and looking for representation everywhere. And I think Insights to Action is more than action. We're taking like real life steps, and we're giving people tangible evidence that they can take on into the world with them. So shout out to us.
Yeah, shout out to us.
Shout out to black women. Shout out to black people. Yeah.
My name is Papa Adjvan. I'm Ghanaian and Sierra Leonean and was a peer researcher on the project. My background is in diaspora and transnational studies, women and gender studies, and African studies. So I spent a long time researching the experiences of black women, particularly black immigrant women in Canada. So the project really spoke to me because the majority of my education was about, I think, understanding my own lived experience, the experiences of other black women, people who look like me, and contextualizing that within Canada, where we don't really talk about black women often, where there's a lack of race-based data. This project was huge because it gave me the opportunity to contribute to creating that database and to creating that public piece of acknowledgement for folks who are looking for it, for folks who need to be validated or need to, I think, understand their experience in context of the larger experience as well.
I'm Inkimabwana. I'm a peer researcher on this project. I am of Nigerian heritage and I studied life sciences at the University of Toronto. And for me, health equity is something that I'm really passionate about, understanding what are the different things that impact health outside of what's going on inside? I study physiology, human biology, immunology, all that type of stuff, but we know that things such as employment, access to resources, access to, food, things like that also impact our health. And for me, it was really important to work on this project that was about Black women and employment as well as justice systems, because I think that we can't really talk about health and just the overall well-being of young ACB women without really diving into some of the experiences that we're facing within the world. So for me, this project was super impactful and meaningful because it was a chance to really elevate and uplift the voices of young Black women. Within our community, we know the experiences that we've been facing, and we talk about it with one another. But too often at time, it's often silenced or maybe not as valued when we're talking to other folks. So I'm really excited to see, this research project bring some of our experiences to light. So I feel like when it comes to supports in the workplace and community services and things like that, I feel like a lot of us as young Black women find that we might not get the same amount of support or access to supports that, maybe our non-Black counterparts do. Mm-hmm. And I think we kind of heard a lot about that, within the research, within our research project, people talking about when they're coming into new jobs, not even getting access to some really important skills development training that would help them do their job, and then getting, kind of penalized afterwards in regards to maybe doing something wrong, things like that, but they didn't really kind of get the training to, kind of execute it properly in the first place.
They did discuss, overwhelmingly, that there was a lack of recognition of their lived experience, a lack of recognition that they're new to a space or new to a job, and I think there's a really big gap that exists with Black and non-Black coworkers and colleagues in the sense that they might have a relative or a family member or someone else in the workplace that looks like them and has that experience or has that representation. And so I think for a lot of Black women workplace, they're one of few or the only person, and that burden almost being alone inside that space means that folks need a little bit more support than standard workplace training, standard task training as well. There needs to be some more focus on community and having folks feel like they're valued and they're seen, and mental health supports as well, that I do think really lack and create a large gap in people feeling comfortable in the workplace, people feeling safe in their jobs, and people feeling like they have a place to grow, they have a career trajectory, and they know where they're going.
Yeah, for sure. And also just having that grace to, mess up, make mistakes, and learn from that. I think that's something that's really was really important to, I feel a lot of our participants, but them not maybe always feeling like they had that type of space. So I think creating a lot of the kind of call to actions that were brought up was creating more, again, culture relevant trainings, like you said, space to kind of maybe do professional evaluations, things like that, and more maybe one-on-one support, things like that, to really kind of build themselves within the role and kind of continue to advance themselves as we all kind of want to do when we're in these spaces.
During the COVID-19 pandemic that we all experienced, we know now that Black people were more disproportionately suspect to getting COVID, and unfortunately, I think facing the barriers that come with that. But also, Black people were more likely to be in frontline working positions. So working with community, working with folks who are interacting with COVID, being at higher risk of COVID. And I think something that came up a lot in the research was that there was a large push and a big focus to have people work from home and to have people work remotely and have groceries delivered, but not an understanding that the folks that are more at risk of COVID are the folks that do not work jobs that have the luxury of being able to work from home.
So my name is Teresa Sinclair. I'm one of the peer researchers for the Insights to Action project. A little bit about me, my education background: I have a bachelor's degree in sociology as well as a diploma in community work. So a lot of even what kind of brought me to women's health and particularly this project was the fact that it's community-based. That's always been kind of something that is important to me and kind of interests me as well. In terms of thinking about the impact and kind of what this project meant to me, first and foremost, this was an opportunity that I was able to research with other Black women, and that was something that was very new to me. So I really enjoyed that opportunity, mainly because it provided me with new perspectives in terms of, kind of some of the barriers and challenges that young Black women face when we're looking at employment, when we're looking at the justice system. And it was an opportunity to be able to see beyond what I knew. And for me, that was not only eye-opening, but it also was an opportunity to connect on a deeper level in terms of really understanding people's story. And for me, that was really something that I was able to take away. And being it was such a unique experience, it wasn't necessarily something that I've experienced before. So that, for me, made it a very special experience.
So when it comes to gender-based violence and discrimination, what we know is that Black women are the second largest group of female youth to make up the juvenile justice system. And when it comes to schools, young Black girls and women are more likely to report instances of sexual harassment and violence in general in schools. And this was really interesting and correlated to our work because what we found is that many girls were experiencing these as young as in elementary school, where, mostly boys would be either, making comments about their looks, their body, their hair, their skin color, or touching their private parts, especially as young girls go through puberty, making rumors about them, even fighting them, and there isn't really much done for them to deal or address this. This kind of has been normalized. And when I think back to 10 years while I was in school, the same thing was happening. And so it was really interesting to hear this kind of come up again.
Exactly. And I think even when we're looking at the importance of what this work meant, I think it was really important to provide a space to have these conversations, because I think in many ways these things are not happening, and we kind of wonder, is this something that is normal? But no, it's just kind of something that we're not really having those conversations. So it's this was the opportunity for us to not only hear the stories and the experiences that young Black women in many ways haven't even really maybe shared before, right?
Exactly.
So this provided that opportunity and space to do that. It's starting from a young age in childhood, and we're seeing it move forward even into, adult years in terms of in the workplace and in community in general. So when we kind of see these things and we see the evidence, we realize these things really are a problem, and it's we can't necessarily turn a blind eye to it.
The little things random men catcalling at you, and if you don't want to give your number or you don't want to respond, there's this fear that they'll be violent towards you. And so I think what was really important was those subtle ways of harassment and violence that kind of get swept up the rug, and there's no real consequences to it, even though it's really impacting our mental health and how we kind of move when we're in public spaces.
Exactly. And I think when we even think about women and our bodies, I think in many ways it's challenging when you're just showing up as yourself and you're being hypersexualized and all of these things that are uncomfortable, and you kind of, in some ways, as it's happening, how do I respond to that? You're for yourself kind of trying to figure out what is going on, what's happening. And I think in many ways it provides that sense of very uneasiness or uncomfortable kind of setting where you're, for example, going to work and you're feeling you have to battle these things, that it's literally coming to do my job and coming to do the work. So I think it's really important to just really continue this conversation. And I think an important takeaway from our research has been that these conversations need to be ongoing, right? Yeah. This is something that we realize, again, from hearing from participants in the program, that this is maybe the first time I'm even expressing these things. So that in and itself is a problem. We need to be able to create more spaces that people can express and kind of start to heal from these things, because it is important in terms of as we move forward, not just kind of carrying this baggage of all of these things that have happened.
So we found that when it comes to, supporting Black women and ensuring that, Black women feel seen and heard within spaces, whether it's the workplace, justice system, education, things like that, it's really important for us, I think, as researchers to really say that the onus doesn't only fall on us as young Black women, and also trying to find ways that organizations can better, I think, take larger responsibility in supporting Black women as well. And one of the things that came up was increased representation of young Black women within the workplace and leadership positions and things like that.
And that exists at all levels. So right now, something that was discussed quite a bit in the research was an increase in representation of Black women, but only at like the lower level of employment. And so they don't have the power to make decisions, they're not in leadership roles, they're not directors and things like that. Someone else also noted that recruiters weren't Black, and so when they were looking at jobs, like they want to speak to a Black person about what the workplace is like, but the folks that have that kind of power to choose who is inside a workplace also are not Black. So organizations taking greater responsibility to understand that just having a Black face in a room is not enough. Recognizing that like Black folks should be in positions where they have the ability to change policy, to make decisions, to choose who is getting hired, because it makes a big difference across the entire organization, across how folks are served.
And like you said, in regards to policies, a lot of young Black women also said that the policies that they're facing, whether it's within the legal system and not having access or being eligible for certain like legal aid policies or financial aid policies due to maybe their income level or things like that, in order for us to actually start to take a deep dive into these barriers and start to address them, it's really important that we have the voices of our community members there. So if we're increasing the representation of Black women in these decision-making places and policy-making spaces as well, we can then in turn start to really make sure that our policies are more accessible.
I think the big note for organizations is that you can't accommodate for an experience that you've never had and that you know nothing about. And so I think as folks are, something that we discussed in the research as well was like this wave of like EDI policy and things like that. As organizations are taking that time and creating those policies and hiring folks in those roles, recognizing that you don't know what you literally don't know. And prioritizing that experience and having folks who actually know what that lived experience is like and are connected to community in those roles that create those policies that impact folks makes a really big difference as well.
A lot of organizations have said that they want to start to move towards this model of valuing the lived experiences and the voices of our community members, but a lot of them actually don't have the organizational capacity to and need additional training and financial support. So I think when we're thinking of it at a holistic level, thinking of ways that we can maybe find ways to redistribute funding or better support organizations so that they can do this work.
I think a lot of the funding that's in this space right now, especially for community orgs, is largely based on the program and how people can get inside the program without thinking through how folks can access those programs and how, especially when working with Black folks, there are more resources that are needed to make sure that things are accessible for folks. So having earmarked funding designated for programming and for organizations to build that capacity to better support people as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something that a lot of the research participants also highlighted was needing more supports and education around adulting. So understanding that transition between being a teenager, high school to college, being a teenager to being an adult, and sex ed and knowing your rights, and I think some of the financial responsibilities that come with that. So just deeper understanding around what it means to function when you leave home or when you're out of school and you have those decisions to make for yourself. Having those examples and having that education is really important as well.
If we continue to have these spaces, whether they're educational spaces like we talked about or just open kind of conversational spaces for us to talk with one another, share our resources, share our experiences, and really kind of even tying that in with some community organizations and things like that, I think that we can all kind of collectively start to move forward and, like you said, kind of start to debunk some of these myths.
So I think what made the Insights to Action project really unique is that it's kind of one of the first where young Black women are actually leading the work and kind of guiding what is being asked and what we're going to do with it. And what was interesting is that in our findings, we found that young Black women don't want to take up leadership positions. They don't find it appealing. They think it's too demanding. They say it leads to more microaggressions, especially in the workplace. And I thought that was a bit disheartening because we're doing all this to advocate and say that we need more black women being represented in leadership positions and actually making decisions on what's gonna take place in the workplace or just in general, but yet we feel less empowered to take on those type of positions because of the issues that come with feeling tokenized, and again, the microaggressions, feeling policed, and being told what to do, even though you're given the opportunity to, even when you're given the opportunity to kind of take something on, you're still being micromanaged and policed in the workplace. So, yeah, what are your thoughts around that? And have you taken up leadership positions in the workplace, or have you kind of shied away from it because of those discriminatory instances?
I feel like I've been asked a couple times to move up. I remember in retail, they wanted me to be a key holder at some point, and I was like, oh, no, because I know what type of responsibility comes with this. And I don't know that I'm being properly trained for these positions. And then, when something happens, you're going to throw this back on me. Exactly. And I think as a black woman, that's going to affect me differently than it might someone else. Mm-hmm. I know in the media space as well, being a freelance writer now, I think when I was a staff writer in a lot of places, it's sort of like I had to dim my light a bit. Like I didn't want to do too much because I don't feel safe in this space and I don't feel like you've acknowledged my presence in this space. And so if I'm even to move up, I'm aware that you might not give me the respect owed. And also you haven't made a position that's sort of tailored towards people of color and black women, and I don't know how I'm treated in this space. It's sort of, it's tokenism is what it is. And I think we're smarter than that now, and we don't want to put more on ourselves because these spaces don't feel safe for us. I know as a writer, I've taken steps to sort of peel back from a lot of these spaces and do more freelance work because it's sort of like I want to be my own boss. I'd love to move up the corporate ladder, but they found ways to push us out. And it's obvious the ways that they speak to you, the ways that they give you certain types of projects. I know as a culture writer, I write about black issues, I write about black people and black women, and I enjoy it and I love it, but sometimes I'd like to take on other things and I don't feel like I'm being looked at for other things.
I think another key thing that we found is that when black women did have positive experiences when they were in leadership position, it had to do with equity, diversity, inclusion aspects of the organization. It wasn't just leading the team, customer service, tech. It had to be related to the equity. Like it's like you're shoving. It's like the organization is shoving their responsibility of making it a safe space to the people who are feeling the burden of the issues. And so I found that to be a bit interesting. And then also the idea of like, how do you advocate for yourself? Like how do you stand up for yourself without coming across as this angry person, or being able to articulate it in a way that's still assertive, but people will respect it.
I think we're different from our parents' generation as well, because we're the ones who are sort of opening in these leadership roles now. I think more than them, they kind of just like took the back seat to these workspaces because they wanted to make their money and go home. And so there's no one to really speak to and look to sort of get like intel about how to manage these spaces. So how are you grappling with these spaces with all your businesses and everything that you're running? How's that going?
And I think that's another thing that came up is like the lack of mentorship or the lack of access to people who were leading this. And I think it was just more so of like feeling it out, like trial and error, like you're learning as you go. Fortunately, through Women's Health, Women's Hands, I was able to get a mentor. It was my first time having a black woman who was able to mentor me, and that experience really gave me the confidence to apply for this position and now coordinate this project. So I think it's just really finding or cultivating those spaces for black women to see themselves as leaders, to talk to other black women who are leading, and not really think about the negative or the tokenism to it, but really finding the power in our voice and our ability to lead. Because I think a lot of people are saying like, I'm not gonna be the supervisor, I'm not trying to hold the key, but like, if you hold the key, you can then, understand how different processes work and change things ultimately. I think it's very important for young black women to really, look for those positions and and take it on.
I know for myself, it's like every time that I build and I get somewhere in my career, it's like somebody else is going to see this and be inspired, especially in Toronto, especially in Canada, where we don't see a lot of them or a lot of ourselves. And I am still looking for a mentor, but you know, it'll come. I feel like my community is mentorship for me, especially watching everything that you're doing.
I think when we're talking about equity, diversity, leadership in the workplace, you really have to be supporting Black women to be supporting Black people.
And support the Black community, exactly, absolutely. It's us, it's always been us, it's going to continue to be us.
Period. To learn more about the Young Black Women's Anti-Racism Insights to Action project, head over to our website to read our full report and follow us on social media.